So first of all, very briefly, CONRAD is Senior Vice President of a group called As You Sow, an Oakland nonprofit that promotes corporate social responsibility through shareholder advocacy. He's got more than a decade of experience managing corporate dialogues and shareholder advocacy initiatives on key social and environmental issues, and he's engaged with pretty much a who's who of major companies from Coca-Cola, Colgate, Palmolive, Procter & Gamble, McDonald's, Nike, Walt Disney, Best Buy, Apple, etc. Separately, we've got Matt Prindiville, who's Executive Director of Upstream, which engages nonprofit, government, and business leaders to solve the environmental problems caused by products and packaging. So Matt's a social entrepreneur, a policy expert, and a campaign strategist. And he's worked to advance safer chemical policies, toxics use reduction, plastic pollution prevention, and product stewardship throughout the United States. So you can tell we've got a couple of really qualified individuals here to share their views with us, and then Doug Woodring will join them on stage, and we'll have a more give and take open dialogue. So Matt, you're kicking it off? Okay. Please join me in welcoming Matt Prindiville.
Well, thanks so much, and I just want to thank Doug for inviting me to be here with all of you guys today. I love Plasticity. This is my second time at a Plasticity event, and always love to learn new things, especially in my field here, and had a lot of great conversations today as well, so thanks again. Just a couple quick words about Upstream. So we work to bring together the nonprofit, government, and business leaders to help solve the environmental problems caused by products and packaging. And today, our focus is on developing sustainable packaging systems and preventing plastic pollution of the environment. And we have three core projects in the space. We help to coordinate a network of the leading nonprofit organizations working on plastic pollution in the US as part of the larger global Break Free from Plastic movement, which is a movement of over 1,000 organizations worldwide working on these issues. We also have our Cities Innovation Project, where we are working with about a dozen major cities in the United States on action plans and policies to reduce plastic pollution and boost recycling. And then we have our Sustainable Packaging Policy Project, which, for those of you that are familiar with extended producer responsibility, we are one of the tireless crusaders working to get extended producer responsibility for packaging passed here in the United States. And we're doing a lot of work, especially in California, as part of the Cal Recycle Manufacturers Challenge program that's happening right now. And so for a lot of people that know me as an anti-plastic pollution crusader, I think folks would be surprised to find out that I actually love plastic. These are some of my very favorite plastic products, and I want to thank my friends from the plastics industry for my snowboard and my surfboard and my kayak. And also for all of the incredible building materials that you guys create every single year. So my wife and I just finished building our dream home here. My wife designed this house. This is it under construction here. I probably should have put a finished one in because we literally just finished last week. Right now, you can see my wife. My wife Sarah is putting plastic tape over this highly engineered plastic house wrap. We live in Maine, where the temperature drops down into the single digits for much of the winter, and we wanted to build the most energy-efficient green home that we could. And so the house wrap, we literally sealed up every single nook and cranny and crevice with tape and spray foam. And what that enabled us to do is prevent the cold air from infiltrating the house and the warm air from leaving. You can't quite see it in this picture, but we also have a tremendous amount of styrofoam insulation here. So there's 6 inches of styrofoam underneath the concrete slab, which doubles as our first floor, as well as styrofoam insulation around the concrete stem walls. This house is about 2,000 square feet. It's heated entirely with one little teeny heat pump. And most of the time when it was single digits out there in the winter this year, if it was sunny outside, the heat pump wasn't even turning on. And so I can confidently say that we would not have been able to build an energy-efficient green home without the use of plastic. It's an incredible material. And for these kinds of applications, it's exactly the right material for the job. Now, the problem with plastic pollution is that we're using a material which is essentially designed to last forever for all of these single-use disposable applications that are designed to last a couple of minutes and then be thrown away. I want to talk a little bit about a story which I think helps to illustrate kind of the central problem with what we're dealing with today. So CONRAD and I were invited to be part of a global strategy meeting of nonprofit leaders working on plastic pollution in the Philippines last year. There were 70 folks from all around the world. And as part of that meeting, we were invited to conduct a waste audit at a national wildlife refuge, which is about 20 miles outside of Manila. And on our way there, the trip organizer was talking about just what an incredible place this was. He used to go here with his grandfather, and his grandfather would talk about how 40 years ago, they would go there to get away from hustle and bustle of Manila, reconnect with nature, swim in the ocean, and see all these incredible migratory birds that were coming there. And then today, when we stepped off the bus, this is what we stepped on to see here. This was anywhere from ankle deep to mid-thigh deep in places for me, and I'm a big guy, I'm 6'2", as far as the eye could see. Not a single grain of sand was there. And seeing something like this in pictures and seeing it in person are really two totally different things. I was walking along this beach on top of all this plastic debris and just felt this overwhelming sense of despair. You know, what are we doing to our planet? But as we started to sift through and look at what was actually showing up on the beach, I noticed something right off the bat. And I asked my colleague, I said, where are all the bottles, right? There wasn't a single bottle to be seen anywhere, on all these miles of beach that we were walking and collecting these materials, collecting the data. And he said, well, Matt, those have value. And most of those get recycled upstream, and if they make their way down to the beach, there's waste pickers that come through here and clear everything out by noon. Those have value. People are making a living recycling those products. And I said, well, what do you think the PET recycling rate is? And he said, well, we don't have the same kind of data collection that you guys do in the United States. He says, but unofficially, and he's one of the premier waste advocates in the Philippines, he says it's probably over 90%, which, by the way, is over 3 times the PET recycling rate for bottles here in the United States. So as we started to sift further through what was actually on the beach, we found that this overwhelming sea of plastic really neatly broke down into about 8 or 9 different product categories, right? Plastic bags, styrofoam of all varieties, styrofoam fragments from takeout containers and cups, other kinds of plastic cups, lids, straws, bottle caps, and the big one, all of these single-serve food and beverage packaging. And of course, this is exactly what we see right out here in the streets of Dallas. I actually was giving a similar presentation yesterday. I happened to walk around the music hall, and I found every single one of those products that I just mentioned right outside the music hall where we're having the biggest Earth Day in the world, right? It's exactly the same kind of products we see in my home state of Maine. I was doing an interview with a reporter the other day in this teeny little town of 2,000 people right next to a river, which was about 5 miles upstream from the ocean. Teeny little town, picture beautiful church up on the hillside and classic New England downtown area. And I said, the reporter I said, you want to see what this problem's like? Here, let me just walk you around the parking lot. I took her around the parking lot, and within 5 minutes, I found every single one of the products that I just mentioned right there. I was in Amsterdam last week, and I got to go on a canal tour with my colleagues that are working on plastic pollution in Europe. And again, we're pointing out all the different plastic items, and it's exactly the same kinds of products that we found right here on the beach in the Philippines, in my home state of Maine, on the beaches of California, and on the canals in Amsterdam, right? Okay? One of the only differences in the developing countries to the developed countries are there's also a lot of single-serve sundry items like dish detergent and laundry detergent and personal care products like shampoos, right? So plastic pollution in the environment is primarily about single-use disposable products that have little to no value in today's recycling systems. And I want to emphasize that point because when I talk about plastic pollution to folks, oftentimes I hear, oh, we just need to recycle more. But the vast majority, when you take out PET bottles, the vast majority of everything that's left, it costs so much more to collect and process the material than you can get from selling the scrap. And I've been a recycling advocate my entire career, right? And I have a lot of friends that work in MRFs and are MRF owners. a lot of what we're dealing with here are all of these single-use disposable plastic items that have little to no value in today's recycling systems. It's mostly to-go food and beverage packaging. It's mostly consumable packaging that we're talking about. And we can prevent plastic pollution through targeted product-focused strategies. And I think this is, for me, this is really the big takeaway, and this is, I know this is a different opinion than a lot of folks here that have here in the room. But my belief is that if we can get out of plastic for these high pollution products, we can solve plastic pollution. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So one of the things that we're really excited about in the advocacy community, the folks that are working on plastic pollution from the NGO side, is the tremendous amount of awareness raising that's happened over the last 5 years around plastic pollution. And I want to credit my friend Rachel Sarnoff from the Five Gyres Institute. Hi, Rachel. You know, her organization, they go out and sail out into the oceans, into the gyres, document the kinds of pollution that's happening, and bring it back for all the world to see. And it's those kinds of science organizations and also the power of social media, all these viral images. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that has happened around plastic pollution is the video with the sea turtle with the straw being pulled out of its nose, right? These kinds of things are really helping to elevate this issue so that you've got a majority of the world's population that's now aware of a problem that they didn't even know existed 5 years ago. But in the last 5 years, this problem has only gotten exponentially worse. And a lot of the solutions work to date has primarily focused on what individual consumers can do, right? You know, bring your reusable bag, don't litter, take your reusable mug to the coffee shop. And these things are important, right? But they're really a drop in the bucket for what we actually need. And from our perspective, the business community created the throwaway society, and we need the business community to replace it with a culture of stewardship. Thank you. That's my board member right there. So thank you, Marion. So how can we do that? So from our perspective, you know, we've been looking at the systematic ways that businesses can help address plastic pollution. You know, first and foremost, you have to know which of your products are winding up in the environment. I know that there's a lot of companies here that are working on the solutions, right? You know, primarily we're talking about food service companies, consumer brands, the retailers and grocers here. This is who we're talking about. It's not all those. It's not all of their products. It's not all your products, right? It's really a handful of products that are winding up in the environment, and we really need to take a targeted approach. Oftentimes, you know, I think when people think about plastic pollution, they look at all of the plastic items in their life and they say, "Oh my God," you know. But when it comes down, what it comes down to, it really comes down to those, you know, 9, 10 different types of product categories that we need to focus the lion's share of our energy on. So first and foremost, because we're talking about consumables, right, the highest and best thing that companies can do is to figure out how to deliver those consumable products in ways that don't use any disposable materials at all. And I want to use an example here. So how many of you folks have stood in line outside of a Starbucks at 7 o'clock in the morning in any country around, any city around the country here? I know I've been in that line multiple times, right? Imagine if Starbucks were to open up a fast lane for folks that had their reusable mug. Imagine what a game changer that would be. All of a sudden, you know, you're standing there in line and you see folks with their reusable mugs just speeding right by you to get their coffee immediately instead of waiting in line, right? There's cities in Europe right now that are passing ordinances which really came out of this university initiative. They're passing ordinances to require coffee shops to serve reusable mugs on deposit. And it came out of, there were a bunch of university students that were in a city called Freiburg. It's a city of about 250,000 people, and they were sitting there saying, you know, we've got incredible amount of disposable coffee cup waste on our campus. We're in this green college in this green city, in the middle of the greenest country in the world. You know, what's going on? And they found out that a lot of folks had reusable mugs, but they would forget to put it in their bag in the morning, or they'd forget to put it, into their briefcase when they were going out to lunch with some colleagues. And so they said, what if we offered a reusable mug on deposit? And so they instituted this, and within a month, they had dropped disposable coffee cup waste by 30%. And it was so popular that the city of Freiburg decided to adopt it as an ordinance. And that was so popular that now the city of Berlin has just adopted an ordinance to do something similar, a city of 3.5 million people, right? So these are the kinds of game changer initiatives that can really deliver those same kinds of goods and services in ways that don't use any disposable materials at all. We're not talking about just substituting paper for plastic here, right? The other is to use, if you have to use disposable materials, use the ones that if they get in the environment, they're not a big deal. And again, we're not talking about all plastic here. We're talking about the plastic products that are winding up in the environment. So if you have to use disposable materials, find a way to use non-plastic materials that can biodegrade if they get in the environment. And I think, plastic cutlery is a great example. A lot of us want to eat our salad out in the park on a sunny day. Bamboo, compressed fiber, they're making edible cutlery now. These are all kinds of options that we can do that if they get in the environment, it's not going to cause the same kinds of problems that plastic will. And then finally, if neither one of those options currently works for your product, and I'm thinking of Clif Bars here. I am constantly on the go, and I'm constantly forgetting to eat lunch before giving talks like these. I rely on Clif Bars and Kind Bars to keep me going in these situations. And I know that the folks at Clif are committed to getting a compostable package, right? They're investing in the solutions that we need to see. So, first and foremost, no disposable materials, non-plastic biodegradables materials second, and if you can't get there, then redesigning either your product, package, or system to help do that. And then finally, companies have a tremendous amount of influence over the folks in their supply chain. And there's all kinds of ways that companies can get involved to boost source reduction, to boost recycling and composting in their supply chain, and also working on public policy. I've been a policy advocate for much of my career. I can't tell you what a game changer it is when forward-thinking companies step into state legislatures or step into city councils or congressional committees and say, we want to do the right thing. And we want our whole industry to be held to the same standards so that we're not put at a competitive disadvantage by doing the right thing. It's incredibly powerful when companies can come out into policy settings and do that. And it's oftentimes, what I've found in my career is that usually you can assemble the environmental community on one side and the business community on the other. And typically, it takes a forward-thinking company to break ranks and join with the environmental side. And those companies tend to benefit long-term because they're positioning themselves for that bigger picture change. And then finally, after you've done all these things, that's the time to engage your customers, right? I know a lot of folks want to engage their customers right away and tell their customers what to do, but we think that if you really want to engage your customers around being part of solutions to problems like plastic pollution, you have to walk the talk, right? You have to be authentically involved in helping to solve these kinds of problems. So here's my summary slide. I know you guys, I'm not going to go through it again. I'm sure you can get all of our slides after the event here. But I just want to say one quick thing about innovation before we close. Some of you guys might know this company. These are the guys that have figured out how to create a substance that looks, behaves, and acts very much like styrofoam, but it's made out of mushrooms and can biodegrade in the environment in a matter of weeks. So game changer kind of technology. And these are the kinds of innovations we need to see in the space. One of the things that I think is a hang-up about innovation is that the innovation's a place where the business world wants to go first, right? Folks get very excited about, the innovation buzzword and the design buzzword and the redesign buzzword, but sometimes this kind of belief that science will save us gets in the way of implementing the real-world practical solutions that are available to us today. And with plastic pollution, it's really not a technology problem. Mostly what we're talking about is a crisis of will here. It's the will for people, for businesses, for government to change how we do things when confronted with problems like plastic pollution. And it's really, this is not rocket science, right? It's really about replacing this throwaway society, which is a completely new human invention. Right? For most of human history, for most of civilization, the ideals has been around thrift and around stewardship. The throwaway society is something that we really need to put to bed, and we really need the business community to get on board with helping us figure out how to do that. And if I can leave you with one thing, this is the, cutting to the most important thing. Again, if we can phase out of plastic for these high pollution products in the environment, saving plastic for all the other valuable applications that we've been talking about today, we can solve this problem in a matter of years and not decades. So thank you very much for having me today, folks. I'm looking forward to our question and answer period. Thanks a lot.
Matt, why don't you stay there for 1 second? We'll do one question as we switch the slides over.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So anyone have a quick question for Matt while we're switching slides? Maybe I could ask a question on the policy side. Sure. And the aggregation of companies who get together to try to change something in the standards or the legislation. Do you see any of that happening right now, and what might be 1 or 2 areas where they're trying to do that?
With plastic pollution policy, a lot of the focus has been on bans. I think people are aware of that. California has been a pioneer around getting plastic bag bans and styrofoam container bans, and of course, the plastics industry has been very concerned about these things and has pushed back very hard. The role of policy on plastics, I think, goes well beyond bans. I think for some of the low-hanging fruit, like styrofoam takeout containers and disposable shopping bags, there's still an important role for bans. But I also think, we want to encourage technology innovations. And I mentioned the leash the lid technology that Rick and I were discussing as part of his presentation. What we found is that policy can often be an innovation driver, and that sometimes, and I'll give you an example here. Years ago, I was working to pass one of the first laws in the country requiring the manufacturers of compact fluorescent light bulbs to set up a collection and recycling program so that they could prevent all that mercury in those light bulbs from getting into the environment. And at that point, the lighting industry was completely opposed to this extended producer responsibility legislation. And they said, don't worry, LEDs are coming. And at that point, this was in 2009, they said, LEDs will be, it's probably 20 years, 15 or 20 years off. And we said, we need the LEDs now. And this is, we think that you guys, by putting all this mercury into these products, which then has to be managed as hazardous waste and contributes to mercury pollution in the environment, we think you guys should have to make sure that you're paying to get those light bulbs, recycle them, separate the mercury. And what we found out over time, and what we've heard from folks in the lighting industry, is that helped to drive the commercialization of LEDs, because all of these policy things were happening around the country, requiring them to pay significant amounts of money to make sure that those products, the mercury didn't get in the environment. So those are the kinds of things that we hope to see around extended producer responsibility for packaging. This is the law of the land for over 1 billion people in the world. Almost all of Europe, much of Canada, increasingly Southeast Asia, increasingly in places in South America. It's the law of the land, right? But here in the United States, we've mostly seen the consumer brands line up in opposition. And if we're going to solve plastic pollution, it's going to require also infrastructure investment as well. And we need the funding to come from somewhere. The local governments, the state governments are completely broke right now. We need that investment from industry. So I have high hopes that we can move something forward in California. But for the rest of the country, we're in a very tough place with moving EPR for packaging forward.
Great.